Bienvenidos a todos a esta nueva clase de la Universidad del Sentido. Welcome everybody to this new lecture of the University of Meaning. Benvenuti a tutti a questa nuova lezione dell'Università del Senso. Algunas breves indicaciones antes de empezar. Some brief indications before we start. Alcune brevi indicazioni prima di iniziare. La clase se tendrá en español, pero para todos los que lo deseen tenemos 3 canales habilitados de traducción simultánea. Para activar el audio, tienen que hacer clic en el icono que ven en la barra de abajo de su pantalla con el símbolo del mundo. The lecture will be held in Spanish, but for all of those who wish, we have 3 simultaneous translations channels enabled. To activate the audio, you have to click on the world icon that you see in the bar at the bottom of your screen. La lezione sarà in spagnolo. Per i nostri cari amici italiani abbiamo un canale attivo anche in italiano. Basta che facciate clic sull'icona che vedete nella barra nella parte inferiore dello schermo con il simbolo del mondo. Va a haber un tiempo en la clase para responder preguntas. Todo aquel que durante la conversación quiera escribir algunas preguntas podrá hacerlo seleccionando el icono de preguntas y respuestas en la barra inferior de la pantalla. Después, si quieren hacer su pregunta en vivo, tendrán que levantar la mano cuando comience el tiempo de preguntas y respuestas. There will be a time in class to answer questions. Anyone who wants to write some questions during the lecture can do it by selecting the question and answer icon in the bar at the bottom of your screen. If you want to ask your question live, you will have to raise your hand when the time to answer questions starts. Ci sarà un momento durante la lezione per rispondere alle domande. Chi volesse scrivere le sue domande durante la lezione può farlo selezionando l'icona di domande e risposte che appare nella parte inferiore dello schermo. Quando inizieremo il momento delle domande e risposte, potete fare la vostra domanda dal vivo alzando la mano. Muchas gracias a todos por estar con nosotros hoy. En breve comenzará la clase. Thanks everyone for being with us today. We are about to start. Grazie a tutti di accompagnarci anche oggi. Stiamo per iniziare.
Un pozo en la plaza, en alguna plaza de esta tierra, de tierra seca, eso sí. Un pozo como un surco, como cauces que esperan el deshielo. Un pozo que no es más que una espera, un pozo que no es más, es menos. Menos de todo esto que secó la tierra y quizá para los que escuchan, para los que esperan, algo de por allá, de lo que aún no, pero quizá. ¿De qué se trata la educación si no es precisamente de un pozo? Un silencio entre palabras, silencio que callando termina también por callarlas. Pero espere, me dirán, las palabras no son aquello que del mundo comprendimos. Sería peligroso en ese caso callarlas. Sería callar al mundo, ¿no cree? Lo siento, yo no puse las reglas. Silencio antes de nacer, silencio luego de morir. Y en medio, esto. La existencia de cada uno, la de cada mundo, la de cada tiempo. Pero este silencio que la pre y procede justamente es aquel que la cede, es decir, que la regala. Deberé cavar la tierra seca que fui hasta conseguir, como diría el Jacob de Robert Balser, volverme un enigma para mí mismo. Para volver a salir y cumplir con la responsabilidad de toda vida, la de expresarse viviendo. Un pozo en una plaza dio rumbo a escuelas y a su educación por el mundo. La escucha en el corazón de la experiencia y de allí mismo este pensamiento, como el origen de todo relato que abismando funda. Su educación no será tapar, ni cubrir, ni llenar, como lo hace el asfalto sobre la tierra, sino cavar, vaciar y desasir, para que en algún pozo de alguna plaza, de algún mundo de tierra seca, de alguna existencia cansada, riegue la vida su sentido y un nuevo relato, como el olivo, crezca.
Welcome everyone, benvenuti a tutti. We are very sorry, but we had some technical problems with the simultaneous translation in English and Italian. We have simultaneous translation only on French today. We will upload the videos of the lectures translated to English and Italian for all who couldn't see it today. Benvenuti a tutti, ci dispiace di raccontarvi che abbiamo avuto qualche problemi col sistema di interpretazioni, quindi faremo tutto il possibile per avere la traduzione all'italiano nel video che metteremo poi su YouTube. Quindi ci dispiace. Ahora sí, bienvenidos y bienvenidas a la Universidad del Sentido, de Escolas. No será esta universidad el lugar de las carreras, las competencias y las búsquedas, sino más bien el de la demora, la fragilidad y el encuentro. No será este un lugar de aprendizajes útiles y novedosos, sino de viejas y bellas enseñanzas. Como verán, no sueña Escolas la educación del futuro, sino aquella del origen. Pero tampoco del origen de la educación, del origen mismo. Claro, de esto no tenemos ni idea. De hecho, de esto no tenemos. Esto nos falta, como un pozo en la plaza, en la tierra seca, en la cultura, en la propia vida. Como un pozo en las palabras. Si nos enseñaron a esquivar el pozo, a no tropezarnos inútilmente para llegar rápidamente a alguna parte, nuestro enseñante de hoy es aquel apasionado, capaz de perder el tiempo, como los niños, cavando pozos en la arena. ¿Para ser felices? No. ¿Para ser mejores? Tampoco. Y ni siquiera en busca de agua. Quizás intenten desnudar la playa. Quizás creyeron escuchar algo. Quizás intuyen que este mundo y que esta vida no tienen la última palabra. Tenemos con nosotros al enemigo de la respuesta y el amante de la pregunta. Tenemos con nosotros a Darío Sztajnszrajber, filósofo en tiempos en que pensar parece innecesario, pero sobre todo maestro, profe, enseñante, en tiempos en que enseñar deja de ser una ciencia para volver a ser un arte. Darío, querido, muchas gracias por estar acá con nosotros. Te escuchamos.
Qué difícil empezar desde la emoción, pero entre las palabras de Carlos Scliar que escuchaba ahí de fondo y tu presentación.
How difficult it is to start from emotion, but from the word of Carlos Clear that I heard in your presentation, I fell down in the hole. So from that hole, I would like to say many things around a concept or a word that somehow translates all these minutes that will have to do with one problem, that is a problem of translation. We understand each other when we believe we are understanding each other and what we are understanding. And I believe that the great challenge for me is to work with you for some time about the word deconstruction, to see if somehow this can be translated and see what we are saying when we talk about deconstruction. Somehow this translates my way of doing philosophy, and I believe that somehow this is the way in which the world where we live is offering us to connect with different realities, with what is possible. There is a characterization, not a definition, that we find in Jacques Derrida, the philosopher of deconstruction, the one that offers this term. We can do something, we can translate, we can fight, we like respect, we massify. Also, you know that one of the big problems that deconstruction has today, paradoxically, is that everybody uses the word, generating this idea of endless vanity. Because when the world becomes massive, the limits get lost. Maybe the big problem of academy has always been its relationship with the popular, with the people, with its typical characteristic of people, because the academy itself is the one that loses the limits. And it shows itself as an institution of power that is what somehow is being hidden all the time. The word deconstruction massively circulates. And this is quite a challenge for those who have a leg in the academy and the other leg in the world of broadcasting or promotion, so that somehow, at the same time, this influences and implies and has some direct consequences, inspirational consequences in the reality of the people. All those who do deconstruction do not understand teaching only by that mode, but that way, inspiring, being teachers, inspiring others to get transformed. That's it. There's no productive action, there's no strategic action or industrial action. We are not producing students, we are inspiring transformation. Then each person will take it and return it. This characterization that I was mentioning at the beginning, that is set somewhere in some text. In the deconstruction lies the experience of the impossible. For me, well, this is encrypted, enclosed. The sense of deconstruction, as we open up this phrase, we will open up this phrase, this concept during this talk. We need to associate it. I need a board behind, I need a blackboard, but we have to associate it to a phrase that probably you know, or you have somewhere in your mind, a famous phrase of the French May, a graffiti of those that flooded Paris streets over 50 years ago, which said, let's be realistic. Let's require the impossible. In this paradoxical game where precisely this would seem to be that being realistic is just to keep what is possible. So the paradox announced in being realistic and demanding, it's more demanding, requiring the impossible, is more than taking us to rethink or making us rethink what is the field of extension of the impossible. This makes us rethink what we call reality, what somehow the French month of May is asking us to understand is that maybe what makes us understand what is reality is just a partial reality. just expropriated reality, imaginated reality. So we are thinking about another reality, a different from the one we are immersed with no election, naturalized in its claims. The phrase of Derrida, deconstruction or philosophy, is the experience of the impossible, and this has something of this. The impossible is that of which we cannot have an experience. How somebody is going to tell us that we can have an experience of what we do not have any experience of, something that cannot be experienced. And maybe the question post-religious, allow me to say this, is if the only experience is not precisely the experience of what is being told to us, that we cannot have an experience, because the supposed experiences that we are having, that structure us, that go through us, maybe is the experience of the possible. But who sustains, who structures, who defines the conditions of what is possible? Even more, what is presented as possible marks a border, a limit. Maybe the only desire is this leap, this transgression, this going beyond the limit imposed. The most famous phrase of Derrida, maybe you know it, maybe you don't know it's Derrida, or you have it with a different concept, says something like, it says in a text called Dramatology, a book that is written in the time of the French May, 1 year before. Derrida says there's nothing outside the text. Everything is text, because we are gone across, built by language and facts, by what our relationship, a linguistic fact. We are language, basically. Our only possibility of having access, we translate everything, we understand everything through the word. Is there anything more than words? Derrida asks. There's nothing outside that. The word of possible is the possible word of being put in words. The word of the impossible is this nothing that lies outside of text. And although Derrida is telling us that there's nothing outside text, the only thing we are interested in is this nothing that lies there, because what is inside the text, we know that it is inside of the experience, of the experienceable, something that can be experienced. And the only thing that enlightens us is to have this leap, this jump, especially when we know there is nothing outside the text. Maybe this philosophy is understanding this nothing. When back in the 17th or 18th century says the last word of philosophy is why the being and not nothing, we believed that what we had to do in philosophical research is to answer to the question why there's something when there could have been nothing. We believed that the only drive of our knowledge was to answer why. What makes things be possible and be? What about if it was the other way around? If the interesting thing is not only understand why being, but understanding why not nothing. What is this nothing that lies there, that is getting around and somehow is interrelated with everything that lies out there? Said differently, in other words, if everything can be deconstructed because everything is part of the text, there's what is not undeconstructed. It would seem it is not. And however, there is a tendency, a trend towards that space, towards this silence, to the absence that ends up being the only thing we're interested in, because it's from this chasm, this original nothing of this abysm, or this, in ontological terms, we have everything we are and everything we have. Unfortunately, the word deconstruction has been put in a different location, especially in times where we live with a strong conservative reaction, as usually happens, makes out of words and concepts. This radicalizes and makes it a stereotype in a certain place. In order to revile or insult, I would say, I believe that conservative revolution has to do with this today. And not by chance, this has made a deconstruction one of the favorite, when the word is associated to identity, when this has to do with the scapegoat, this tap that opens up, you open the tap and your hut will get flooded. So when you open the tap of deconstruction, not only will you start deconstructing text, in the case of opening the faucet, you start deconstructing yourself in your relationship and basic ideas, especially those of us who understand that we are text. So when deconstruction is a fact of the text, and we ourselves are text, evidently we have to see how we deconstruct ourselves. And somehow conservatism throughout the times always tries to stick to places that are that comes from a natural order, something like an unscattered or an intact, untouched concept, destabilization. Those who try to look for deconstruction, we are not afraid of destabilization because we understand that any deconstruction is we understand that tremor is deconstruction of our existence. We don't mean that there's no destabilization or that something is dismissed. Quite on the contrary, we believe that living our existence in a light way is not connecting with existential anguish and believing that identity ends up solved in the privilege of class or gender, and especially in a world of generalized consumption that permanently confuses the search for my own sense with the mercantilized or commercial sense of the products which are sold to us. Apparently there's a difference that somehow raises the idea of deconstruction. And two things, minimum things, to come out of this reading, conservative reading about deconstruction. First, deconstructing is not destroying. This is basic. This is the first thing that is placed as an essential thing. But I would like to say something that I left out. There is a text by Dari called Letter to a Japanese Friend, which is in a book that maybe I have it somewhere here, called Psyches. Here, Psyche. In this big book, we have this article called Letter to a Japanese Friend. Basically, Derrida wants to translate the word deconstruction, and it says how to translate the word into Japanese, since the language builds tense, constructs means. So translation always means an excess or a lack, but not always an equivalence, never an equivalence. In itself, the word deconstruction cannot be translated in the sense, in its own sense. I mean, not only do I have the problem of the language, but also other problems. So this, in general terms, in the world of theology, is known with the term negative theology. Basically, this is saying what is not, what deconstruction is not, to somehow get closer, especially, well, with the little thing that we have exposed here. There's some circular characteristic that maybe you understand. If everything can be deconstructed, the definition of deconstructed can also be deconstructed. Every definition of deconstruction does not have the presential validity or the definition in a paradigm in deconstruction where every definition is visualized as arbitrary report. So somehow this would be like contradicting ourselves. I don't mean this is good or bad. I mean, when proposing a definition, it is evident that Derrida's twist is right, not trying to define it in a frontal way. So I would like to understand, this is just 4 or 5 pages. This is simple. It's very good. It's kind of emotional. Going back to emotion, I would like to say some things about what deconstruction is not. This does not mean destroying. Deconstructing is not destroying. Having a dialogue with conservatism. For example, when we listen to the word deconstructing the family, for example, we are not destroying the family. We are decentralizing, and the only way to present in the family event in an hegemonic way. One thing is destroying the family, and a different thing is destroying the idea that there's only one version of the family that, on top of that, is presented hegemonically as the natural one, as the normal one, as deconstructing is not only is not destructing, it's the other way around. It's emancipating all those versions of the analyzed event that for different reasons have been underground, under the carpet. All those versions that were placed below so that the official version appears as the only one. In Latin, versions that are below, are under their own version, subverted. So it cannot be a subversive practice because it shows those versions that for some reason have been left out. The word subversion, even in Argentina, even more in Argentina, they have their own meaning because words have their own, and it's not just by chance that conservatism has to do with deconstruction. It's like a demoniac act, like I would like to stop 1 minute with the idea of this demonic characterization. Why Ezequiel was introducing me and I was listening to Carlos' words in the introduction, I was remembering this. I remember 2 ideas by Derrida that came to my mind, to my heart, not to my mind, to my heart, to my body, to my heart that is part of your body, the mind that is part of the body. Nobody knows yet what a body can do. Spinoza said, nobody knows what a body can do. So these 2 images came to my mind or to my body, especially the idea that is not deconstruction, because homologation of the act of something that is removed from expression of an absolutely superficial, spurious, bogus thing. 2 ideas by Derrida. A text called Memories of the Sky. When will we subvert, rethink the role of the eye, our access to what? Because for thousands of years, the Occidental, the Western culture, we believe that the eye is a place through which we see, mainly in a visual culture like ours, and in a visual religion also, because somehow in this passage between Judaism and Christianism, there's a passage in the ear. God presented himself more in the Old Testament through the eye, and in the New Testament it appears more in the visual, the figure of Christ. In visual terms, Derrida says, through the eye, not only can we see, through the eye we can cry. We cry. And maybe it is much more interesting to understand we are in existential terms, not so much in terms of what we see, but what we cry, the weeps, the tears, maybe one of the least philosophical categories in principle. However, from where we can express the relationship of sense. I was listening to Carlos with the music that you put at the beginning, that you put great music that jumps and leaps into, well, tears. Only those who have this gift, who can manage their tears and the emotion, universal emotion, but this reading at the beginning of the eye as deconstruction. You have an act of deconstruction there. We have this set, deeply set, that eyes have to do with sight that is imposed. However, tears themselves connect you also with another version of the sense. Not everything can be explained. That's why there's tears. Tears arise as a result of commotion, happiness, sadness. The grammatical structure cannot translate, cannot contain, cannot do anything, nothing. At some point in time you cry, you just cry. Isn't that knowledge? We still believe that knowledge means opening up a dictionary and defining concepts analytically. Just wait for me for 1 second. I have a battery problem. Lots of tears, but I need battery. Okay, I have plugged it in. Second image that comes to my mind is Derrida's relationship with what was his last stage. In his last stage, he gets involved in hospitality. a messianic thing, Derrida. And I would also like to stop there. These thinkers that, well, we believe that since, well, he's the father of deconstruction, the relationship or his relationship with religious is distant. But no, quite on the contrary, this is the only thing he's interested in. But the only thing he's interested in, because what he does maybe is deconstruction, and you can understand it in this way. Institutional formats of a religion, on behalf of religion, has not done any other thing than be traitors to the original question. I have not read a more religious author than Derrida. And he will never say I follow dogma or I believe in God, things like that. But there's some gestures in Derrida's question that in its fight for institutional enclosure can... Deconstruction is always deconstructing in different ways. Evidently, this is something that cannot be imposed in word. What has been imposed or is institutionalized leaves or stops that open space for questions. Derrida works a lot on the idea of God. There's a text as unless the name, with the exception of the name. He's only interested about the name of God. There's Derrida's John D. Caputo has this book. He's a disciple that is called A Weakness of God, a theology of the event, of the happening. And at some point he says, all the names of God are deconstructible. We visualize from where they are put, the names are put, what is the goal, what is this responding to? Does that mean there's no God? No, quite on the contrary. This means that what cannot be deconstructed, God, is the one that all the time is warning us that all the names of God are institutional enclosures. To have access, once I have deconstructed the names of God, can I have access to that God? Well, no. What do we mean by having access? Understanding it, putting it in the word. This means inserting it in the machine to be deconstructed. See this metaphor, the great thing of philosophy, in the simplest, handy thing, those categories which are permanently surrounding us. Sometimes, pedagogically, a world is activated. He says, my relationship with God is whenever I got to them, I have it in the tip of the tongue. Just leave it there. That's the feeling, unstable feeling that your link with God is always about to be a word. When this becomes a word, this is a word, that's it, you're out. And this becomes part of a system, an institutional system. Administration comes behind it, of the economy, of the global thing, of the worldly thing. I love this image taken to other places, such as love. Love is always at the tip of our tongue. When you can tell somebody why you love that person, you just love that person. Because if you were able to translate this into a rational recipe, the fact that of love is always at the tip of the tongue. Because somehow you try to convey this from a place that escapes from you. If the eye, as Derrida said, is more crying and seeing, the mouth is more kissing and less talking. The mouth, well, you talk. You kiss and you eat. And I want to go to this third verb, because in the last stage, Derrida gets involved with the animal thing. I'm trying to see what are the latest topics of the authors to see where things go along. The last two topics of Derrida are sexual identity and all the philosophy of gender and feminism. Fortunately, they have gone through those categories. And the animal option, many texts, beautiful text. The animal I am being is one of them that comes from a dialogue that Derrida has with his cat. He sees that the cat is looking at him, and they write 200 pages about the relationship between animal and the human aspect. And again, the question comes out. He says, historically, and we see what deconstructing means. Historically, we always think that our link with the animals from the question, or based on the question if animals think or if animals talk. And from there, we have generated and we have built, constructed a border, a frontier. This border is not visible. It's an artificious frontier or border that imposes something, the human and the animal. We see ourselves as a human species on the one hand, and on the other hand, well, as the Bible and the text and the philosophers say, this border was built when you deconstruct. Basically, you show that most of the normalized, standardized concepts that we conceive, normal, natural concepts, massive, sturdy concepts, closed concepts, all of them are effect and product of a construction. That's why deconstructing is like disassembling, showing the assembly that has made categories that have become from the common sense, and we stop visualizing their history. In the blunt differentiation between the man and human, there's a policy, there's a decision of setting this limit, this boundary, which has no foundation more than the foundation of, well, we have an example. Darío, it's obvious that the human being has nothing to do with the animal world, and the proof is how we have done this at our image, and we dominate it the way we do it. Okay, why don't you tell this to COVID-19? We believe ourselves the owners of nature, and just one virus turns the whole thing around. One virus, and we believe we are the owners of nature. Well, let's deconstruct the supposedly not constructed thing. What is presented as not constructed. Derrida says, stop thinking. Just, if animals think, why don't we ask ourselves if animals suffer? Because if we change the criteria and our border, our limit is not in the capacity of thinking, in the Greek logos, in the European logos, but in the suffering, what changes? There's a world is deorganized, and it will get reorganized in new manners. So, in this act of deconstruction, we wonder What is superficial? Nothing, quite on the contrary. I believe I am coming to the end, so I will close. Ezequiel, just let me know when I could talk until Christmas time about this topic. I can deconstruct Christmas as well, but let's not do it because we need, after this hard year, we need some love and some hugs. I will leave this for the end. Three words with which to associate deconstruction. Deconstructing is disassembling something that presents to us as not the fruit of an assembly or the result of an assembly. So it generates commotion, evidently, because deconstruction very well translates a Nietzschean idea. That is, that Nietzsche says we can always do philosophy with hammers, by hammering. The hammer, more than thinking about this as a punk that goes out and tries to break everything. This is one of the most fascinating philosophies of the 20th century, punk. We also have this small idea of somebody who is wild, rock, savage, everything that is behind this reading of cultures is fascinating in the punk world. But this hammering, we could think about this in different ways. In fact, Nietzsche thinks about the hammer in one of his texts, associated to the doctor. The doctor checks the patient with a hammer. To what extent in our bodies do we have these contents and not vacuums or vacuum reflections? Vacuum idols, Nietzsche. This is the only task of philosophy of the hammer, not very different from the religious text, where clearly unique, the God, more than presenting himself propositively, the first thing he says is, let's break idols down. If you remember this Talmudic reading where Abraham gets into the parents' tent, Terach, and sees he destroyed all the stone idols. He destroys all the stone idols once he receives that call. And Terach says, you have broken all the gods down. He doesn't say it this way. The text does not say exactly that. But God cannot be destroyed, of course. This is the confession. You have destroyed all the gods, and they were not gods then, if you can destroy them. We don't care what Abraham believes in. What is important is we know what to fight with. When Socrates realizes what his mission is, with Delphos oracle states this, Socrates starts fighting against all those who believe are the owners of truth. Do you know why? Because Socrates realizes that if there is a truth, the truth is not in this world, so there's nothing outside the text. So it has just only one certainty, that those who speak on behalf of truth are exercising their own power. The idea is to go out and fight against those who use the name of God to do business, to exercise power, because it's not nobody's own. Because as Nietzsche said in Zarathustra, this is a book for everybody and for nobody, for no one. Something like that is at stake and has to do with the need to go out, to go for this last place, openness, the idea that the more we go forward to understand, the more we go to the bottom, we realize that at the bottom there's no bottom. And if in the bottom there's no bottom, what I clearly understand is those who come to tell us what is there in the bottom. Okay, whether we deconstruct and we set up a certain idea, or as Tenuous Matrix said when he presents Smith, when he introduces Smith to the people, they say, okay, what should I do when Smith says, just go, escape, flight. Ezekiel, I end with this. Maybe the idea, I was reading a text of Walser about the hope, about waiting. It has to do with that. Escaping is not of a coward person, just escaping, getting away. This is not uninterested. The idea is to leave, getting away from the structures that condition us. The idea is not just going somewhere else, it's finding the other place right here, which is always there at the tip of the tongue, telling us that luckily, fortunately, things are still open. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Darío. If you agree, we will now go to the questions. If you raise your hand, you have it in the bar at the bottom. If you raise your hand, you will be able to ask the questions directly to Darío. So all of you who wrote your questions, you can also raise your hand and come to this side. Let's read a written question, and then we will continue with all the other questions. Darío, the question here is, how to create a community without certainties? I don't know of any other way of creating from the non-certainty, other than from non-certainty. Because I believe if there's strong certainty, it is not a community, but I would say that some gather the rest from the appropriation of a certainty. It is very difficult for me to think about a society where we can have both democracy and truth together. In absolute terms, I believe the problem is the absolute. Maybe going to the question of the certainty, along the line of this text by Caputo, we should start having a kind of weaker relationship, understanding weak, not in negative terms. Again, God weakness. This takes us back to the messianic weak strength that we find in Benjamin, but especially in the Pauline letters. When Paul himself aims at God from the weakness, his strength, his power is in weakness. So why can we continue believing in the need of strong structures when that strength, that power, dynamites or makes the eye cry, or is a dynamite for our loving world in the human living? Just to give you a couple of examples. But I believe in the community. I believe in a community that would prioritize others, the other. Esposito was with us 15 days ago, and Esposito has a development of an idea of community, saying that community has to do not with what I have in common with others, but quite on the other hand, quite on the contrary, how can I deconstruct or build with the difference and lack that does not making us monopolizing, as the community is always belongs to the other. So it is key. The absence of absolutes is key. Remember the etymology of the word absolute? Absolute means that there's nothing that is isolated. Can you build community with this nothing that is isolated? We have Alan. Alan, welcome. Please unmute and we'll listen to your question. Hello. I'm saying hi from Mexico. I'm following up your work, Darío. I have several questions. Maybe they can be easily answered, but they are coming to me. First question is, when we talk about deconstruction related to identity, something that identifies us, how till today there's a relationship between deconstruction and politically correct? Isn't there a gap where we could fall into an hegemony or a dogma through the politically correct thing? Another question that comes to my mind, it's more abstract, I believe. Do we need to live or understand, live something to deconstruct, or first we construct, or first we build something to understand it later, to deconstruct it later? Thank you. Well, I take your introduction to the question. The first one is easy to answer. The second one, no. Talking about your questions, so I will do what we do in these cases. So I will answer the easy one first. Clearly, I agree with you, not only with the politically correct, but I'm going for more with your question. If deconstruction becomes a fashion and this becomes the hegemonic discourse or speech, clearly deconstruction loses sense, does not make sense. At some point, when Derrida says it cannot be defined, I believe that in the conceptual aspect, it presents the pillar, the axe or the axle. Somehow, conservative sectors associated to the fact that being a progressive today means to be with deconstruction, and I clearly believe that deconstruction is a reactive effect when faced with a previous order that sustains the need of a stability that is imposed as unique. You will always deconstruct as long as there's construction that is presented as unique. And in that case, I believe that it's hard for us to see that deconstruction becomes an hegemonic discourse. When deconstruction this has to do with the we go up one step upon the ladder. Deconstruction would be a ladder that is used, that we can go to go from one step to the next, to go from the last man, as Nietzsche says, to the next one. And then you burn the ladder. There's no worse deconstruction. What I believe, Alan, is that in these times, knocking against deconstruction from this place means minimizing the effect, a strong effect in our society, that is the hegemonic discourses. So first, hegemonic speeches have to be more flexible, and then we see what we do with deconstruction. Otherwise, we're killing something before having generated this twist. And the second question, is great question. I would say we could think, if we start from deconstruction as a reaction, you will always be inserted in a previous sense of this network, and somehow you have started this network of sense collapses. First, you get inserted in a system of significance, and then you start deconstructing. Now, what would happen if this was the other way around? Today, the world somehow works this way. What I believe is, if educationally speaking, if there's a presence of deconstruction, well, probably this will destabilize this, and quite probably what comes will probably be different. Now, what is coming? Well, all the time this is saying the other is always about to come, always at the tip of the tongue. We cannot define what is coming, because if we define this will not be what is coming. Otherwise, we are projecting what we believe is coming. We have Sophie Sarabia with us. Hi, Sophie. Can you unmute, please?
Gracias. Hola, ¿qué tal?
Let's listen to you. Thank you. Hello. At some time you mentioned the word hospitality. This question came to my mind. What would be the link between deconstruction and hospitality? And you mix it with vulnerability, maybe. Could there be something? Maybe we can link those ideas. I will leave art for a different time. Too many words, art, that appear there. What is hospitality? Derrida works as the opposite to, not a negative, but to, he talks about this against greed. Tolerating means supporting or tolerating, and the one who exercises tolerance exercises power. This is as, well, if I was at home, somebody knocks on the door, the other one comes in and tells me, I am the other one. I need something. What does Derrida say? What is the reaction? The reaction is, I will see if I open up the door to the other or not, if I am tolerant with the other, or if I am intolerant. If I'm intolerant, I will not open the door. I will maybe keep watching a documentary about life in Africa. I will consider myself progressive, and this is the worst part of it. If I do open up that door, and if I am tolerant, Sophie, what I do is exercising power, because I am opening up the door. I would say, please put your shoes here, wash your hands. I start conditioning his visit or her visit at my home, my house, living. The root of dwelling in Latin has the same root as moral. In my dwelling or my moral, come in, I can tolerate you, come in, I let you in, but you have to meet my requirements. I am the owner, I am the homeowner. So I open the door or I don't open the door to you. I am tolerant or I am intolerant. What does Derrida say? Let's deconstruct. Let's break paradigms. You know what Derrida says? Let's go back to the Bible text. In the desert, you're not wondering if you open the door or not, or if you leave the door closed, because you know what? In the desert, there's no doors, there's no houses, there's tents. Tents have no doors. Tents, the other one comes in and gets in but he can get into the tent because the figure of that tent is no door, the figure of the no door. Hospitality means that I don't need to open the door because the structure itself of that tent where I live is a structure which is not conceived around a door, about setting that. Hospitality means that. Being hospitable with whom I believe deserves my hospitality is not being hospitable, not showing hospitality. This means being hospitable or welcoming to anybody, no matter who, anybody. Anybody means any subject, the other is that subject. And it has to be that way. And it has to be. You know, the hospitality, host, is associated etymologically with hostess, hostile. So I am hospitable with the hostile. And I know this is the big paradox, like the only pardoning is the only option is to forgive what can be forgiven or what cannot be forgiven. This is a leap. And I was reading, Simone Weil was at the introductory part that you showed. Loving is not an act of expansion. If I expand myself when I love, there's no power, there's no love. I know this, the experience of the impossible has to do with that. Oh, Florencia is with us. Welcome, Florencia. We'll listen to your question. Hello, Darío. How are you? My question is more than a teacher-learner. Going back to image, nothing outside the text. There's nothing outside the text. My question is, how can we deconstruct or disassemble dialectic or hermeneutics in the virtual classroom during COVID times with my students, taking into account that we come from an adult-centric school? Thank you very much. Many topics, many topics. I believe that, again, I believe this is a great possibility, the virtual classroom, to rethink what a classroom is. If we get into the device of thinking the virtual classroom as a substitution of the face-to-face classroom, we are not capitalizing something that we have not picked. Nobody selected or picked to live. We are capitalizing, to put it somehow, to use subject, the existence somehow. So nobody elected COVID. This is perfect. This is a happening, as we call. Deconstruction has a direct relationship. Something happened. If you are deconstructed and open, whatever is happening will move you, will place you, displace you. If you are closed in yourself, inside yourself, as a person or as an institution, Florencia, not only as a person, being closed will not allow you to visualize. Being closed today means that in this confinement, in this lockout, we have to be as productive as in the past, or believing that a virtual classroom is an exact replacement of a face-to-face, or sexting is a way to relate of having sex that replaces the body and body. The problem is the matrix. It's like asking the science the miracle of the vaccine. How are you going to ask for a miracle from science? You're asking, please, vaccine, come to me, just appear. This is a different logic. Science is a different thing, and it works differently. they do a trial and error. Maybe the vaccine will be good and then it will not be good. There's a modulation of the virus that will make the vaccine not to work well. I don't know. It's a different kind of device. What we do is easier, this idea of the miracle, and we take some gains to a place that is not the right one. More of the same. Let's see what new perspective will open up. And let's not think about the virtual classroom. This is a different thing. When we go back to the face-to-face classroom, fortunately, we will have had the experience of this virtual classroom. And somehow this will make our relationship to have grown, and this is the interesting thing. And as to the virtual classroom, if you don't ask for the substitution, then what new ways are we being able to test in this new experience that is happening? Darío Carol from Panama. If we feel so many things that we express when we cry, and they should not be expressed in words. If I can express, for example, love for my family, love for my parents, and I tell them that I love them, am I doing this deconstruction as a paradox? Would this change everything? That's a question. What would you tell them? Would you cry? Would you hug them? What would you do? Yes. Do you see, Carol, that anyway you would feel that something is missing, right? I am with you in that. Just stop using extra words, too many words. Stop with that. A good hug, a good look, a good view, a shared cry. However, this lack, because the feeling, the sensation, the feeling is what we were bringing from Caputo. There's something in the tip of your tongue, this idea, this feeling was this lack. And this is the most difficult thing for us, is also part of us. And the presence, a paradoxical presence, makes us what we are. In love, I think this is key. Poor love, the one that can be placed 100% of possibilities only in words, just words. Poor love, because words are not the words that we pick, that we select. You see, the industrial formula has been reproduced in the history of human affection. That means saying I love you to someone. The incredible and paradoxical thing of I love you is that these are two words. Two words. And a cursy thing. I don't know if there's a good translation. The word cursy. It's kind of alleged. It's hackneyed. Or it's sappy word, just a lazy fluff word. They are vacuum words. And I believe that if everything that we feel for this irreducible other, the otherness, can be summarized in just 2 words or 3 words, I love you. We can feel that the language is failing. And the paradox here is that if we are aware of this, we die because this person, we would die for that person telling us, I love you. And that is the paradox. This is great. I went somewhere else now. And this happens with soccer. If I'm watching a soccer match, I say, this is the new Roman circus, the Roman circus. This is business, this is anything. And all of a sudden I shout goals. And I say all that with a part of me, and the other part is while I'm thinking philosophically, by deconstructing a Marxist deconstruction of the exploitation of mankind in imagination of soccer, I want my team to become champion. So this means living in this valley of tears. Is this: we are contradiction. We are born to die. We are paradox with legs. If you allow me, since we have a few minutes left, I would like to finish with this question that comes in the tip of the tongue. If the most important thing is there, what gives us life is the one that is at the tip of the tongue. What makes us feel alive is what is in the tip of the tongue. However, there's something that is ours that makes us come out as a word, and with that word we start creating cultures, worlds, projects. How do we do to go back to that moment, to go back to that time with so much that has already been constructed, built, and lived? How can we go back to the tip of the tongue? Maybe, well, you don't go back. You don't go back to the place of origin. Maybe what we are proposing here is the existence of a, let's not get a romantic origin, because otherwise we believe there is a starting point, and I cannot be in this regard, not even in metaphoric terms. I believe that the finite thing is to understand the impossibility to start from a cause concept or sequential concept, when I believe we can go forward and backward. Whatever I feel is, well, being part of infinite. And precisely, I would say, the idea that is updated, that is, if finally this remains here in the origin, this remains in the uncertainty of where we are going. That's how Kierkegaard sustained his hope. He said, I have hope because I don't know where I come from, but I don't have certainty of where I'm going to. That's why I have hope, because logic indicates that I become just food for worms. And this non-definition of the origin also makes me be open to what is coming in the future. I am more Hebrew myself, more than hope. I am still waiting. What happens with me with hope, what happens to me with hope is I feel that there's a lot of formula of hope. What makes noise to me to deconstruction, what makes noise to deconstruction is the format of hope that presents as the marketeers of the temple with the logic, a pharmacological concept. Whenever religion, philosophy, or art become drugs, then they will lose something of the original sense, or the original meaning, that is tremor and trembling. What Carol from Panama was asking, what happens to me with my family? I shiver. This is not going back to a certainty. Ezequiel, I think, is going back to shivering. How much have we lost of this sensitivity? The idea of simply shuddering, trembling, thrilling, not only because of the fact that we can see maybe a dawn or an afternoon, the sun setting. As Epicuro said, there's no bigger pleasure than thinking about existence, but we cannot keep putting formula and words, recipes. I believe that deconstructing is recovering that somehow. And we're starting the end, Darío. We're starting to end, exactly. But this will remain. You see, you realize this? Yes, this will remain.
Bueno, no, gracias.
Thank you very much. A pleasure. And we would love to meet sometime again. We know there are many questions up in the air pending, and there are many people in the English world and the Italian world who would also love to talk to you. So for the time being, we will close, but we did not want to leave without repeating a moment in Scholas which became a ritual, which has to do with, we call it que te pa, or what has happened with this. It was born in the experience with different young people in the world. The question of the impossible, the question of catching what cannot be caught, trapping what cannot be trapped, the question that transforms us. This has to do with passion. It doesn't have to do with what Darío said or what I understood, but what happened to me with what Darío said. We will put a link down here in the chat, and we will ask everybody to get into that link, and you will be able to write, to type some kind of, on a wall, a virtual wall, some blackboard, going back to the classroom with nostalgia, trying to see what happened with your silent, with your words. What happened to you?